Hello, my fellow Inklings, and welcome back to The Eagle and Child, the meeting place of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. For those of us raised in the evangelical tradition, today's teaching may sound foreign at first. It sure was for me. But it is rooted in early Christian church tradition, and it's how millions of Christians understand their faith today. I want to encourage you. It is also the most hopeful message I've ever encountered. So let's get started. I want to tell you something I wish I had heard a long time ago. Something sitting in the history of the Christian church the whole time that somehow never made it to my evangelical upbringing. It's called the Paschal Mystery. When I finally encountered it, the Bible made so much more sense to me, and it helped me let go of so much fear and anxiety that I'd struggled with all my life. About 8 years ago, I realized that I had never read a single book other than the Bible from anyone before Martin Luther. So I studied at a school rooted in Franciscan spirituality, one of the oldest streams of Christian thought, called the Living School, that taught Franciscan alternative orthodoxy. By alternative, I simply mean different, not wrong. One thing I love about the Catholic tradition is something called the minority view, similar to the minority opinion on the Supreme Court, except that it does not mean the wrong view. It means a legitimate view that exists alongside the majority, so is recognized and honored. That's something I didn't really experience in my evangelical upbringing, where the message was often, believe these specific things or else. I'm not saying my evangelical upbringing was totally wrong. I am grateful for so much of it. I am saying it was incomplete. And some of what was missing turned out to be the richest, most life-giving teaching the church has ever produced. So in part 2 of this series, we talked about how Christ is not Jesus' last name. It's a title. And in John's gospel, that title points to something that existed long before Bethlehem. John opens not with a birth story, but with a cosmic declaration. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Through him all things were made. That word in Greek is logos, which means the divine source and ordering principle of all reality. Again, repeat that. The divine source and ordering and principle of all reality. The pattern, the blueprint woven into everything that exists. And then in verse 14 comes the heart of Christianity, the Incarnation. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The word for flesh is sarx in the Greek. And sarx does not mean one individual body. It points to the fullness of all human and material existence. The Incarnation, therefore, is not just God entering one person in first century Palestine. It is the divine pattern entering into the whole of creation, into matter itself, even into us. Paul understood this when he said, Christ in you, the hope of glory. That's Colossians 1:27. Not Christ admired from a distance, Christ in you. Same logos present at the dawn of creation, made fully visible in Jesus, alive and at work in all of us right now. So when Jesus says, I am the way, he's not pointing to himself as a religious figure. He is revealing the pattern that has always been at the heart of reality. And the question now becomes, so what is that pattern? Life, death, resurrection. This is the Paschal Mystery. It's rooted in Augustine in the 5th century. You may have heard it in Catholic or Episcopal liturgy. Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. This come again is the pattern repeating, woven into everything. You see it in nature. A seed dies before it becomes something new. Winter gives way to spring. Night gives way to morning. Scientists tell us that 98% of the atoms in our bodies, they're replaced every year. Life does not end. It simply transforms. Paul made this argument directly, and it's in Scripture. If there is no resurrection of the dead, then Christ has not been raised. That's 1 Corinthians 15:13. The resurrection of Jesus only makes sense because resurrection is already woven into the fabric of creation. It's not a random miracle. It's the living proof of how reality actually works. As Paul writes in Romans, since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made. That's Romans 1:20. The fingerprints of God, the pattern of the Logos, have been visible all along. The resurrection of Jesus did not introduce a new pattern. It revealed the one that was always there. And how much did this pattern matter to Jesus? Well, when the religious leaders demanded a sign, he refused, except one. He said the only sign he would give was the sign of Jonah. You see, Jonah descended into darkness for 3 days in the belly of a great fish, and then was delivered back to his purpose. Jesus said, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of a huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The pattern of death and resurrection was already written into Scripture centuries before Calvary. The only sign and the only way turn out to be the same thing. This pattern is not only cosmic, it shows up in our lives in ways that are quiet, painful, and invisible to everyone around us. For example, a marriage that slowly comes apart, a career that ends before you are ready, a friendship that disappears, a dream you finally have to let go of, a season of depression, a church community that was once home and then wasn't, a health diagnosis of cancer for you or your child, a parent watching a child walk away from their faith. That last one is part of my story, as you know, and a cloud of anxiety that will not go away. That too is a large part of my story. These are the little deaths, and most of us know them well. If you haven't yet, you will. John of the Cross described these seasons as the dark nights of the soul, times when God just feels absent and old certainties no longer hold. It's not a sign that faith is failing. It's a necessary passage, an interior dying that makes room for something truer to emerge. This is what Jesus meant. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. In these little deaths, as we surrender like Jesus, saying, "Thy will be done," the ego then has to give away, and the Christ in us begins to emerge. I want to tell you about one of my darkest nights. I got a phone call from my son Colin's doctor. Colin had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a fast-moving cancer that required immediate chemotherapy. The doctor wanted us to see the oncologist that same day. I don't remember much about the minutes after that call. What I do remember is walking into my bathroom, turning on the shower, and collapsing onto the shower floor, weeping. I didn't know how I was going to tell Colin or his mother. There are no words for that kind of darkness, no theology, no silver lining, no resurrection in sight, just the crushing weight of what you have just heard. It is the grain of wheat fully in the ground. The church sometimes gives us the impression that faith means finding the lesson in the pain right away. But that is not what the Paschal Mystery teaches. It says there is a Friday. Friday is real. Friday is dark, and you cannot see out of the tomb. Even Jesus didn't skip it. On the cross, he cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That is not a man who could see the resurrection coming. That is a man in the ground. And then Sunday came. For Jesus, it came on the third day. For Colin and for me, it came more slowly, but it came. The darkness did not have the final word. It never does. Julian of Norwich, a medieval Christian writer who nearly died from illness, once said, "All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well." That's not easy optimism. That is someone who went all the way into the darkness and came out on the other side, trusting in the pattern. The invitation of the Paschal Mystery is not to pretend Friday isn't real. It is to trust, even when you cannot see it or feel it, that Sunday is coming. C.S. Lewis described what this mystery produces in us. He called it a good infection, the life of Christ rising in us from the inside out. In Mere Christianity, he wrote, "Every Christian is to become a little Christ. The whole purpose of becoming a Christian is simply nothing else." Lewis is not talking about people who attend church or sign off on the right doctrines. He's talking about people being transformed into the same pattern Jesus embodied. People in whom the logos, the divine pattern of self-giving love, is becoming visible. Think about what that looked like in Jesus. He forgave people who didn't deserve it. He touched people nobody else would touch. He surrendered his comfort, his safety, his life. Because love, real love, always gives itself away. That is what little Christ looks like. Not a perfect person, someone slowly, imperfectly learning to love the way Jesus loved. As our ego dies, something truer emerges. The fruits of the Spirit become visible. Your little Christ. Let me bring this back to where it becomes most real. Jesus, arrested in the dark, abandoned, mocked, beaten, handed over to be killed, dying in public while onlookers sneer, and in his final moments, crying out like we said, my God, why have you forsaken me? That is Friday. That is the Logos, the eternal pattern of love, fully in the grave. And then Sunday came. The tomb was empty, the stone was rolled away, and the first person to see the risen Jesus was not a king or a priest. It was a woman, weeping alone in the garden, who suddenly heard someone call her name. So that's the pattern. That's the way. Love that goes all the way into the darkest places and comes out on the other side. So is Jesus the only way? The Logos, the divine pattern, is the only way reality works. And Jesus is the clearest, most personal, most beautiful picture of that pattern we have ever seen. C.S. Lewis believed God's grace may reach further than any of us can see. That some may belong to Christ without ever knowing his name. I find that not threatening, but beautiful. It means God is even more generous than we imagined. But this much is clear. The way Jesus lived, loved, forgave, and surrendered is the truest picture of reality that we have. And we're invited to participate in it, not just at the end of life, right now, in every failure, every loss, every desert season. I have overcome the world, Jesus said, speaking as the Christ. Whatever you're facing, a health crisis, a broken relationship, fear about the state of our world, take heart. Resurrection, not death, has the final word. This past year, I spoke to a small group of college freshmen, scholars, high achievers, only a few weeks from leaving home. The topic was purpose and meaning. At the end, I paused, looked at their faces, and said something I had not planned on saying. You're going to be okay. I saw tears. One student came up afterwards and cried when I hugged her. It touched something very deep. It's not a matter how successful or all put together we appear. Every one of us carries something that whispers, you are not okay. Something might be terribly wrong. So let me say it to you now. You are going to be okay. It's all going to be very good. Through every death, there will be resurrection. Through every Friday, there will be a Sunday. Through every moment of crying out into the silence, there will be a morning when someone calls your name. That is the Paschal mystery. That is why the earliest followers of Jesus were known not as Christians, but as followers of the way. This pattern, this Logos, is the way of the Christ. It's the way of Jesus. And it is, in the most beautiful sense imaginable, the only way there is. I hope to see you again soon at the Eagle and Child. Grace and peace.